Fun, fun in the sun. All right. Well, very sorry. I've been a bit busy lately. Past few months, I went on vacation. I did some stuff, whatever, you don't care. But the point is, I am back. And you all want to hear about Julie C. Well, I managed to finally read the next book, book 3. Oh my goodness. uh, so I actually needed to do a little refresher for myself about what had happened in the last 2 books. And so I'll give you guys a little refresher about what happened in the last few books. So basically, Julius Caesar goes up, he fights the Helvetii, which is in, of course, Switzerland. Then he goes up and he fights some Germans, kicks them out of town. I forgot that guy's name. What was that guy's name? I'll put it up if I find it. But after that, he goes up to Belgium and he fights the Bell guy. He beats the hell out of all of them. And then Julius Caesar said that he sent one man with one legion across all of Gaul to pacify whatever was left. Because the rest of Gaul at that point was pretty much just like fractured tribes and stuff. So that one legion was able to do it because Caesar basically showed up and looked around and said, "Hello, everybody," and beat the hell out of all the big fish in the pond. And so all the other little fish were like, "Yeah, we'll just, yeah, you want some corn, right? You want some tribute? Here you go. We got you. Just don't kill us." And so then winter comes. I did make a mistake, though, in the last video. At the end of the last video, I said that Julius Caesar went back to Italy at the end of that year. Apparently, he did not. Instead, he actually wintered in Gaul. And one of the things he did during this time... So I'm just going to jump in here and give you guys a little detailed breakdown of what happened. So Caesar sends a fellow by the name of Galba, one of his commanders, into this area to try to essentially hold off some issues they were having in here in regards to this pass that the Romans often took to get through the Alps. So Galba shows up and he has one single legion with him. He has one legion with him, and they're going to winter here. So they're setting up their winter camp. They've got a few trenches dug, a few defensive battlements set up. But one day they essentially look up, and on the side of the mountain there's like 30,000 Gauls about to beat the shit out of them. And so Galba's trying to figure out what to do, and his people basically advise him to just run away. But they don't do that. They decide to fight. This is 5,000 Romans versus allegedly 30,000 Gauls. And the Gauls attack, and the Romans are sitting in their defensive position. And it says the Romans are there for like 6 hours fighting constantly. And it's so bad, the fighting is so intense, that even the injured Roman soldiers are not able to return to basically fall back. They have to stay in their positions and keep fighting. So it's essentially a fight to the death. And the moment that there's this kind of lull in the battle after 6 hours of fighting, Galba has to make a decision here. He can either run away, or he can try to fix some of the damage to their their defensive positions here and gear up for the next fight when these Gauls inevitably return, or he could fight. So he decides to sally out and try to get these guys. He basically doesn't give them a moment to rest as they're kind of backing up for this lull in the fight, because their guys are getting, the bad guys, not the bad guys, but the Gauls are getting exhausted as well. He tells his exhausted, half-dead Romans to chase after them. And they do. And according to Caesar, they manage to kill or capture 1/3 of the enemy. And the rest of the enemy, the other 20,000, allegedly 20,000 men, they all run away. Seeing this. So, Galba, after being victorious now, decides, okay, now we can leave. And so he kind of pulls his men up out of this valley and down over into a more defensive area, somewhere around here. Into a more defensible area, because he doesn't want that to happen again. But before they leave, of course, they make sure to burn down the make sure to burn down the local village. And this is the modern day area of that. I think it was called Octodurus at the time, the Battle of Octodurus, but I'm not sure exactly where within this valley the battle took place, because I know historians have said it was a really closed in area, and that's why they don't know if there was actually 30,000, because it'd be hard to tell with everyone clamped up, and that would be the only way really that 5,000 Romans could hold off 30,000 enemies. But when you look it up, it says that it was actually right here, which seems far more open. So yeah, I don't know. Wow, that's really interesting. Look at that. You think this is the past, like the actual old Roman path that they would take to get through the Alps, right along this road here? I mean, that would be awesome. I gotta look that up. I gotta look up what paths they took to get through the Alps. Anyways, yeah, back to the video. After this happens, Caesar says that he's basically like taking a tour of Gaul, since he's pacified all of it, and he's kind of like just traveling around looking at these different areas, meeting with people and collecting tribute and collecting slaves, or not slaves, collecting hostages, your firstborn son, so that you don't revolt against him. But while Caesar is doing this, he says that, suddenly war broke out. And so, of course, reading this, you're like, oh, great, now what? Now what? And once again, it turns out people don't like being rolled over in their homeland by foreigners. And this war breaks out up in this little section of France called Brittany. Essentially what happened is there's this Roman commander there. I think his name was Crassus. No relation. And he's got some a few cohorts up there, I think. These people, this one tribe, who are the Latani, I think, they have given hostages to Caesar, to the Romans, after Caesar, pacified everything. And essentially what they do is, as these Roman officers are traveling through their lands, as kind of ambassadors, envoys, whatever you want to call them, the Latani kidnap them. They kidnap these Roman officers, and it's a very bold move, bold enough to convince the other surrounding tribes in Brittany to basically do the same thing.
rise up, and they write to, I'm pretty sure it's to Crassus, but they write to him, and they essentially say, if you want your officers back, then give us our sons and daughters back that you took. Give us our sons and daughters back that you took as hostages. And so he kind of thinks about it. He writes out to Julius Caesar, who's on this tour at this time, tells him what's going on. And Caesar's like, well, don't worry, I'll handle it. And he orders the building. Caesar orders the building of a fleet of ships. Caesar's currently on this river. I think it's the Liore River. I'll have to look it up, but you'll know before I do. But Caesar's somewhere along this river, and he orders the building of a fleet because he knows for a fact that these people in Brittany are very, very good sailors. He says that they regularly take trips to the island of Britain. And because of that, the English Channel, it's very rough, it's very choppy. There's a lot of storms through that area, he says, and but they're used to taking these trips, so they're very good sailors. And he knows, because they're out on this little peninsula thing, that he's going to need ships. So Caesar orders the building of a fleet of ships, and he starts making his way over to that area because he's going to fight these guys on sea and on land. But before he does that, he has a bit of an intuition kind of moment, and he sends Roman officers along with, I think, a few legions, and spreads them all throughout Gaul, all throughout his new domain, his new empire. Just in case, when word gets out that Caesar is at war right now, people won't revolt. And because he's expecting, essentially, whenever everybody else that he's just conquered learns that he's busy fighting over here, everyone's going to rise up and build up their defenses and yada, yada, yada. So Caesar kind of puts people throughout as almost like a police force throughout the Gallic territories. So Caesar arrives at Brittany, and I think he sends Crassus down south to Aquitania after he arrives. But Caesar starts pushing into the peninsula, and he starts trying to get these guys, but they're doing this thing where it's like Caesar can never really get a grasp on. He can never find a whole army to defeat. They've kind of melted into their cities and their villages, and they're hiding, and they have the hostages, and it's this kind of cat and mouse game where Caesar's like, this area is so rough that I can't take it by force. I mean, I could, it's just going to take a while. So he basically just waits for his ships to arrive. And so his ships come sailing up the river. They come out of the mouth of the river into the Atlantic Ocean. And they kind of curve up towards the capital town, capital city, whatever you want to call it. But the main city where these Latani are held up. And he says that as soon as his ships are seen, the Latani send out their ships, their navy. 220 ships, he says. Now, this is where things start to get kind of funny. This is where things start to get very Caesar, Right? That's the best way I can describe it after reading these 3 books so far. They get very Caesar very quickly. Caesar says that these people, the people of this region, they're a bunch of filthy barbarians. He makes note of that. They're barbarians. They're not very good. They're not very smart. But then simultaneously, he's also kind of praising their ship making abilities. He essentially admits, oh, these people make the best ships in the known world. It's basically what he says. These people make the best ships. Their ships are bigger, they're taller, they're stronger, they have better wood. He says they don't use rope, they use chains. The nails they use are the size of a man's thumb. They're huge, big, scary, hulking ships, and they're made for sailing in rough, choppy waters. But then the underside is also very shallow, so they can navigate the shallows of these bays and the rocky waters. And the only thing I would say that's not very good is they use animal skin instead of linen for their sails. But maybe there's a religious reason why they do that. But they're barbarians. They're just impressive barbarians. It's like, brother, can't even give them that. You can't even give them that. Which, he ends up admitting that the only advantage that the Roman ships have, the Roman ships that are designed for the Mediterranean and are now in the choppy, cold waters of the Atlantic, is that the Roman ships are faster. Roman ships are smaller, but they're faster. He says this engagement begins to take place, and D. Brutus, well, I'm sure they're related, but I don't remember what the D is. I don't remember what this guy's first name is, but in the translation I'm reading, it's just called D. Brutus. That's what they call him. But Brutus is in charge of this navy. And once again, it's very Caesar. Caesar can't really give him credit for doing this. But Caesar admits that there's nothing that the Romans can do to beat these guys. They can run away from them if they want. Or sail around them. But he says they're not strong enough to puncture the side of their ships. They're outnumbered. What are we going to do? And Caesar says that Brutus, who's in charge of this navy, is out there on the water, comes up with an idea for how to defeat these guys. But he makes sure to note that, no good idea happens in my army without my say-so, right? He's basically trying to steal this guy's good idea from him, saying that just by virtue of Caesar watching this battle happen, his victory is also Caesar's victory. Remember, these are my men doing this, not this guy. They're my men who are doing this. It's my officer who came up with a good idea. He didn't come up with it on his own. He came up with it for me, kind of. And I approved it, even though we couldn't communicate back and forth because he was on the ocean and I was standing on a hillside with my thumb up my ass with the rest of my army, just kind of watching the battle take place and eating popcorn. But anyways, this grand idea, that's a police officer and I'm not wearing my seatbelt properly. Oh, he was texting on his phone. He don't give a shit. He didn't even look up. He probably didn't have his radar on, man. Anyways, this grand idea for how to defeat these guys is the Romans have these things, I don't remember what he calls it. They're basically hooks at the end of sticks. Hooky sticks. And they use them to come up alongside the enemy ships and pull the yards down. And they're pulling the yards down, and then they start boarding the enemy ships. They're basically doing like pirate shit right here, and except they're doing it by force. So Caesar talks about how at multiple points in the battle, there's one Roman ship surrounded by 2 or 3 enemy ships, and the Romans are just ripping down their sails and and climbing up onto the enemy ships and slaughtering everybody, and then getting back and going onto the other ship and killing everybody there and throwing them overboard. And he says that very quickly the battle turns, and the rest of these people start the rest of these enemy, these barbarians, turn and start sailing away as quickly as possible. But he notes that the Roman Navy, chases them down one by one and pretty much gets all of them. So Caesar, who by his own admission has not won a single battle on land in this war, basically says, yeah, and then they kind of gave up. Like the whole people gave up. Why? Because Caesar says that they had built such a large navy and they put so much of their stock into the idea of this navy and their navy being superior that they basically lost a majority of their fighting age male population. And so they no one to defend their city. Caesar shows up, he sacks their city, he sacks a bunch of their small towns, and then everybody else gives up. And they're all pacified. So Caesar didn't have to do much. It was all, so I guess it kind of makes sense that he was trying to tell the guy, look, it was only because of me, because my brilliance, that he was brilliant enough to come up with the brilliant plan to end this war. But he realized he couldn't just not mention it in his book because he's writing these things to the Senate. So that's something I just kind of realized talking to you guys. I wasn't thinking about that. I was trying to figure out, like, why was he being such a prick to this guy, like trying to take away from his achievement? Because then it would look like Caesar showed up and did nothing, and his man was the better guy. Brutus of all people, a Brutus of all people. So while this is happening, it turns out that Caesar's intuition was correct. People do revolt. So as Caesar arrives at this place and is starting to fight this war up in Brittany, a bit to the northeast, there's a revolt that's going on, and I'm gonna kind of gloss over these parts because it's a lot of not really interesting stuff. I think there's a reason why a lot of historians or YouTubers don't talk about this kind of thing. But I think there's some really interesting points that happen in this. So I'm gonna talk about it a bit. Up in this area here. Basically, these people start a revolt. There is a Roman officer in the area trying to suppress this revolt. And something happens where the Roman officer is basically seen as being a coward. It says that he keeps holding on. He says the enemy showed up, one of these French guys, he shows up with his army, parks it just a few miles outside the Roman camp, and he goes out and he sets up every single day his army, basically goading the Romans, saying, "We're going to fight today? No? Okay. We're going to fight today? No? Okay." Caesar notes that this Roman officer, his men start to see him as being cowardly, saying like he's not doing anything, he's not fighting, he's not, But Caesar starts to defend this guy. And I start to wonder why. Why is he defending this guy? Because the way he's saying is like, this officer, he just didn't want to engage in a battle in which it would be disadvantageous to engage in he wanted to wait he didn't want to attack without the command of his boss. And it's almost like he's throwing shade at the first guy from back at that one battle where they were outnumbered in the Alps. It almost kind of feels like that because whereas he's kind of praising this guy for his foresight to not attack and not engage in battle. But what ends up happening, it's one of the most Roman things I've ever heard of. This officer, because they have Gallic auxiliaries with them, they have locals that are also fighting with them. This Roman officer takes the commander of one of his auxiliary forces and says, "Hey, pretend to be a deserter. Go over there and tell them what I'm about to tell you." So this officer, or this Gallic auxiliary leader goes over to the enemy camp, pretends to be a deserter, or yeah, pretends to be a deserter and tells them Julius Caesar is getting his ass kicked over there in Brittany, and my entire auxiliary force is being called away. Tomorrow, my forces aren't going to be there; they're going to be gone. And so the German these Gallic warriors, they rejoice. That heck yeah, half that army's not going to be there tomorrow. This is going to be great. When the sun rises, they're in such a hurry to try to get to the Roman camp and sack the Roman camp that they've got these bundles of sticks and twigs and stuff to fill up the Roman trenches, and they're all hauling ass across this battlefield. I think it's like 2 miles, 2 Roman miles. They go running to reach the Roman camp and fill up the trenches so they can go in and sack the Roman camp. When they get there, they're exhausted from carrying these things. They're exhausted from trying to hurry over as quickly as possible. And instead, what they find, of course, is a ready Roman army with its auxiliaries still. And they get absolutely slaughtered. But I just wanted to make note of that because it's a very Roman thing, and I think it's hilarious. Meanwhile, while this is happening, another revolt, or I don't even know if it was. Anyway, there's revolts that basically pop up all over the place. But down in Aquitania, where Crassus was sent, there's another kind of revolt happening, and I don't remember what happens. I think Crassus ends up sending his men around to the enemy rear, and they break into the camp before they even realize they're getting broken into, and they get the hell beat out of them. Whatever. Caesar finishes his situation, and he comes marching out of Brittany, out of the land of the Latani and their allies. And he says, basically all of Gaul had once again been pacified, with the exception of a few people. And I decided to go take care of those few people. So he shows up to this area where he's going to beat back these holdouts who are still daring to revolt against the great Caesar. And it's another thing that I think is the reason why I'm talking about this. Is another thing that's a very Roman thing to do. A lot of people gloss over this stuff, or they omit it altogether when they talk about it. It's really cool. What he does is he essentially gets a hold of the enemy's baggage, right? Which is like all their food, a bunch of their extra weapons, their cattle, their everything. Usually their women and children. And he's chasing the actual army itself over a distance, and they melt into this forest. The enemy does. Caesar does not chase them into the forest. Instead, he realizes that they're probably going to regroup there in the forest and then try to come out at another point, knowing that Rome's going to set up camp outside the forest. And Caesar doesn't like that. He doesn't want a forest that close to his army. So what he does is he tells his men, cut down the forest. And so they do. They cut a huge swath out of this forest. I think he said in 2 days, it's basically like a mile of forest has been cut down, just stumps. And they take all of the wood, the branches and the trunks and all that, and Caesar has them pile it up on the Roman flanks to build walls. So now, instead of being an army sitting next to a wall of trees where people could come out and attack him, he now has a big open battlefield with walls built on his flanks in a matter of days. And he sits there for a bit, and he might have been wrong in this situation where he said he thought that they were going to come out and attack him. because after he does all this stuff, he says, he basically says, well, my work here is done. There's no way they're going to come back and attack us. We have their baggage. We tore up a forest, or we're in an advantageous position. We're just going to end that now. We're going to call it a victory. And so he does. He calls it a victory. And of course, Caesar makes note throughout this entire time of him trying to deal with all these revolts and stuff happening, that you got to remember, he's taking gold, he's taking slaves, he's taking corn, even though, especially taking corn, because corn is something that he notes it's very light. He does not have enough corn to feed his men. Throughout this entire campaign, he keeps talking about how the Romans just didn't have enough food. They just didn't have enough food. They kept thinking they were going to starve us out because we didn't have enough food, and we burned their villages down. We took their food, and we took them all for slaves. So they learned what would happen if you revolt against us. And I made a promise to them when I took their hostages, their sons and daughters, and so I have to keep that promise because I'm Caesar. So once again, he says, well, job well done, time to winter, and we did great. Good job, man. But next, I think I know what's going to happen next. Next, I think, is going to be the return of the Germans, and that's going to be the fun one, because Roman engineering is just amazing, and it's inspired me a lot in my own writings, especially my fantasy writings, to create these really impressive feats of engineering as a way of indicating just how good an army is. And I think one of the things that's going to happen in the next book is holy crap, that's a lot of people, is the bridge building. So we'll have to wait and see about that. But I'm going to try to get it done as quickly as possible. Our factory right now is on shutdown, and so there's a bunch of people called in. Pretty much all the shifts have been called in to do extra work. So the parking lot is about twice as full as it should be. But I'm gonna park over here in the handicap spot. I mean, none of these people are parked in parking spaces. I should be fine to park in a handicap spot, right? They can get over it. What are they going to do about it? Tow me? Probably. Anyways, that's all I got. Thanks for watching. I'm excited to read the next book. I'm actually going to read it while I'm at work today because we don't have a whole lot to do in the warehouse. So, yeah, thanks for watching. Adios.